All right. I hope that everyone is doing well. Welcome to our navigating. Let me make sure I have the full title correct for you all. Navigating the do's and don'ts of nonprofit involvement in electoral activities. My name is Nefesha Israel, and I'm the Director of Programs for California for the Arts. We have two amazing speakers with us today that I'll give an introduction to just shortly after we do some simple housekeeping items. Remember to keep your microphones on mute during the presentation. We will have time after the presentation for Q&A and maybe even some time during the presentation if our speakers would like to invite guests for discussion, then we'll have some time for some questions or some discussion. If you have any questions that come up, please feel free to drop them into the chat. We'll have the opportunity to answer and discuss all of those after the presentation. We'll take about 20 to 30 minutes at the end to have some more discussion. Feel free to also write your name in the chat, right, where you're coming, where you're logging in from, maybe your organization you're connected with if you would like. If you would like to network also in the chat, there's quite a bit of you all. We can see each other since this is set up like a meeting, which is great. And so get connected in the chat. And we'll also be sending the slides and the recordings of this webinar after today's session. So you'll be able to access everything. You don't have to write real fast. There's going to be a lot of content and you'll be able to go back, look at the slides and the recording. Before I introduce our speakers, I would like our team to hop in. I think a few of our team members are on right now. And so one at a time, maybe we can go Terry and then LT. I think that's all of our team right now.
Hello, all. I'm Terry Ball. I'm Programs Manager here at CFTA. I have probably dealt with some of you through the grants programs that we did back in COVID. Welcome, and it's great to see you all here today. LT.
Hello, everyone. My name is LT Martinez. I am the Executive Liaison here with California for the Arts, and I will be manning the slides. And it's really lovely to have you all here with us. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you both. And they will be helping in the background with the slides and in the chat. So thank you both for joining us today. And to get to our speakers that will be sharing about the navigating the do's and don'ts of nonprofit involvement in electoral activities, we're going to start our session off with Rose Chan Loui, who is the founding executive director of the newly established Lowell Milken Center of Philanthropy and Nonprofits at UCLA School of Law. Prior to joining UCLA, Rose was the official counsel at Rodriguez, Hurry, Choi, and Cafeteria LLP, excuse me if I pronounce any of that wrong, where she counseled all types of tax-exempt organizations and specialized in structuring and implementing advocacy and lobbying programs. Rose also represented nonprofits and businesses and individuals in federal and state tax controversy matters. These are short bios. If you would like to see the full bio, you can go to our website where our events page is, and you can find this event with a fuller bio. Both of our speakers have really expensive bios, really impressive resumes, so feel free to do that. I'm also going to introduce Peter because he will be speaking after Rose. Peter Allen is a third-generation San Jose resident and a founding core team member at San Jose Arts Advocates. A former chair of the City of San Jose Arts Commission and Planning Commission, Peter is an independent communications consultant and has spent the last 13 years as a board member, board president, and managing director at Teatro Vision, a Latinx Chicanx theater company nurturing arts and opportunity in underserved San Jose communities. And so we welcome both of them to this webinar. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for taking the time out to speak with us about electoral activities. And I am now going to pass the microphone over to Rose, who will share about her work.
I'm muting. Hello, everyone. First, I want to thank California for the Arts for inviting me here today. In addition to my day job, I am board chair of East West Players, so I am especially excited to get to speak to fellow arts people here today. So I, through private practice, have become very passionate about educating people about advocacy, because I just think in many situations, it's really the best way to fulfill mission. And I was a little distressed looking at Independent Sector's last report, where they reported that nonprofits are actually doing less advocacy, not regular, just general advocacy, not even just lobbying, than they were doing 20 years ago, which for me just meant that there's a lot more work to do on the education end of all this. So that leads us to so my job here today is to set the legal framework for electoral activities. I think we can go on to our first slide, LT. Okay, second slide. So I have always, I created this Venn diagram quite a while ago, but I really like to use it just to illustrate how much advocacy can be done that's neither limited nor prohibited. So you'll see all these circles, and then in red, legislative lobbying, and in the other one, political campaigning or election work. And so we'll cover mostly the electoral advocacy part of this today, but it just gives you, I think, a good sense for how much can be done that does not, that's not regulated by the Internal Revenue Service. So a disclaimer here, most of what we're going to talk about today are IRS rules or Internal Revenue Code rules, as opposed to state rules that also might require reporting and federal rules. All right, next slide. So this, again, little bit on the legal framework under the Internal Revenue Code, with, depending on what kind of 501c3 you are. We will mostly be talking about the first column, which is 501c3s that are public charities. And public charity means that you get your funding from a wide range. Mostly the public, as opposed to a private foundation, which gets its funding from, like, let's say a family or a corporation. So as a 501c3 public charity, absolutely no political campaigning is allowed. But the important thing there is to understand what that means. Everyone has different definitions of what political means. So we will go through that. I think that's fundamental to knowing what you can do. And then I'll just mention, I'm going to try to get into legislative lobbying as much as I can today. But we're focused on the fact that it's an election year and we need to know what we can't do in terms of political campaigning. So legislative lobbying is allowed, but in a quote, insubstantial amount. If you elect something called 501H, then you have a very specific formula for how much you can do. The one thing I want to note on private foundations, I think most people on this are operating nonprofits as opposed to private foundations or funders. But it still might be helpful for you to note that while a private foundation can't do legislative lobbying directly, it may give grants to public charities that do lobbying work. And so that's a whole other seminar or webinar, but it's something I think useful for you as grantees to know. And then C4, C5, C6s. This is a really good way for 501c3s to act collectively. I mean, you can form your own C4, which is allowed to do political campaigning and a lot of legislative lobbying. I think it might be, well, actually we have a perfect example. California for the Arts has a C4 called California Arts Advocates. And that is a very good way to extend the kind of work you can do in the political sphere. All right, I think we can go on to the next slide. So I just put up some questions that you might think about as I go over the rules. Now let's see, I don't know if I want to read them all, but questions such as, can you endorse a senatorial candidate because you like one person, one candidate because they have shown support for increased funding for the arts versus the senator who has been proposing an NEA funding cut. Second question would be, can you invite senatorial candidates to speak at your events? What if they're just a guest? And if they come, how do you introduce them, or do you introduce them? And third, can you honor a senatorial candidate at your next fundraiser, for example? And what if they've been a longtime supporter of your organization and they're even volunteer, perhaps? Next slide. Yeah. So what about if the staff of one of the senatorial candidates wants to hold a fundraising event in your facility? You have a beautiful place. Should you say yes? But alternatively, you have an online newspaper or newsletter. Can you inform your members about the positions of the two senatorial candidates in that newsletter? So not an endorsement, but you're just informing. And then more boldly, can you distribute campaign material in your organization's lobby? And, you know, on and on. So can you register voters? Can you host a candidate debate? So questions to keep in the back of your head while I go through some of the rules. All right, next slide, please, LT. So what is political campaigning? It is not everything. It is participation in any campaign for or against any candidate for elective public office. But that's at every level, national, state, or local. And the thing with this prohibition is it's absolute. So there's no de minimis exception. You know, you can't say, but I just did it once and it was just a very small statement. And it doesn't matter if it didn't cost you anything. And note that it is both communications about a candidate as well as the political party. All right, next slide. All right, so we'll start with what's not permitted. Endorsements. So you cannot say, vote for Nefesha, she is the best candidate for us. And you cannot fundraise for the candidates or the parties. You cannot distribute candidate or party materials. And I think the one that sometimes gets missed is you can't provide a candidate with use of your organization's assets. So going back, for example, to one of the questions, if they ask if they can use your gorgeous facility, you then have to make, if you're inclined to say yes, you'll have to make that opportunity available to all of the other candidates, and probably generally available for political events. And so a lot to think about before you say yes. And it's not just facilities, it's any of your organization's assets, newsletter, equipment, employee time. So, all right. So now let's talk about what is permissible. So this is the good news. You can do all kinds of things actually. So the key word or the key concept is education. So if you're always thinking on educating the public, that's a good place to start. So candidate debates and forums, for example, you can educate the public by bringing the candidates on, but it's critical that the candidate debate forum be conducted in a nonpartisan manner. So, and you have to remember that speech might be partisan even without a vote for so-and-so statement of support or opposition. So what are some of the rules for that? One, this one I think is the hardest one maybe for people to implement. Like, for example, we're arts organizations. We can't limit the list of questions only to issues involving the arts. You have to provide or ask questions of the candidates that are on a wide-ranging set of topics. The moderator needs to be very neutral, can't favor one candidate over the other. And then you have to invite all the candidates for that office, unless you really don't think that they have any shot of advancing. And the ruling, as I recall, is like if they have like 15% or less, you're probably okay not including them. But that's just one fact. There's not any specific rule. What else? Equal treatment of each candidate. You can't ask for any pledges. You can't ask a question and then say, will you pledge to follow your statement? And finally, you can fact check responses from the candidates, but you can't indicate support or opposition to their position by doing that. Okay, that's candidates. I want to back up actually, because before I go through all of these different permissible activities, I think I just want to make clear, because so much of what we do these days in terms of communication to our membership or to the public in general are done online, that that the rules are pretty much the same, whether you're promoting or advocating in a newspaper, in a magazine, on TV, radio, and then online. So it's not substantively any different. I think the opportunity that we've now been given is that advocacy online is much more affordable and arguably more impactful in terms of how many people we reach. But there's also kind of some things that can trip us up when advocating online. And that's mainly that everything you share online, you have to assume is going to be attributed to you as your activity or your speech. So the tricky thing with that is when you link to other people's websites. Not only are you responsible for what you link to at that moment, but the IRS holds you responsible for changes to where that link leads. So you, once you link to other people's websites and speech, you're responsible for monitoring changes to their website. So yeah, the other thing is there's no specific rule to which part, to how many clicks means that you link to specific speech on someone else's website. But generally, for example, if you're linking to someone's website and they have speech that's fine on one page, you don't want to link to the page that they have on their website that would constitute political campaign or type of speech. So it is okay. Generally, what I tell people is just link to their About Us page, where it's, it's a general, that should be safe. It probably shouldn't change too frequently. But that's really the danger, I think, with operating online. All right. So just that caveat, because I know that was one question that we were asked to cover. All right, going back to our list of permissible activities, publication of voting records, that is allowed. And when we say publication of voting records, again, that needs to be very neutral in how it's done. So the IRS actually, so all you're supposed to be doing when you're distributing voting records is compiling votes cast. And similar to candidate debates and forums, you're supposed to cover their voting records on all types of issues, not just the ones you care about. Now, there is an exception for that. If you're distributing the voting record only to your organization's members, defined as people who donate regularly to you or who are frequent volunteers, or like in the case of California for the Arts, I think it's very defined, right? You have a membership. Then in that case, you can target your scorecard to votes on a narrow set of issues that are of interest to your organization. Let's see what else. Yeah, I don't want to, I know I have limited time, so I'm going to move on. Candidate questionnaires, same similar rule. But the guidelines are you have to distribute the questions to all candidates. You can include questions that, but the way they're written, they hint at the quote correct answer, the one you want to hear. You can ask a candidate to pledge their support. You can't compare their responses to the organization's views on the issues. And again, you have to include questions on a broad range of issues. So not just the ones that you care about, because again, that would bias the questions toward the candidate who's most favorable to your organization's mission or concerns. And then for voter guides, again, the same rule of neutrality. You want to publish all their responses and print the answers as the candidate provides, although you can give them like word limits so that they don't go on and on. In terms of publishing them, some logistics are you can't favor one by making it bold or somehow making one candidate's responses stand out. So it should be same font, same print size, all very impartial. And finally, you don't want to coordinate questions with a candidate's team or committee. All right. Next, get out the vote drives are absolutely okay. The thing to watch there is you don't want to only focus your get out the vote drives on communities you believe will vote your way. Now, the caveat there is you can target neighborhoods that are or populations that are historically underrepresented at the polls. So let's say young people, low income community members, homeless individuals, people with disabilities. Let's see, but again, not because they're likely to vote for your particular candidate or party. And then in terms of doing your get out the vote, you can encourage people to vote or to the vote because there are critical issues on the ballot, but you can't present them in such a way that you are essentially telling them how to vote. So you can pick up the theme here. The neutrality is really important. You can also do voter registration campaigns. And finally, you can do public opinion polls and research. What else? Let's see. What am I doing on time? I have 10 minutes, so I should get moving. All right. Next. Some election year activities. Here we go. This was kind of reflected in the questions. I think one of the things that's sometimes hardest is that your organization knows your, one or more of the candidates who are running in a particular election year. And what happens if they want to appear at your events, or you want to promote their candidacy because they are supportive of the arts, etc. You really just have to be very careful. I'm not going to go over candidate panels again because we did that. But if you have a candidate you might be able to have them appear in a non-candidate capacity if certain facts are met. For example, if they're already holding public office and they attend in that capacity, so then they can do that. And then the rule is that you should not mention that they're running for office, and you can't go on and on about how they've been wonderful supporters of your organization, et cetera, and please vote for them. You might be able to justify their appearing in a non-candidate capacity if they're an expert on some non-political field. They're speaking on the environment and they have a PhD in that. If they have some kind of very distinguished military, legal, or public service career and you're honoring them for that. History of involvement with the organization that you can prove, or if they're attending as just a member of the public. But generally, when I was in private practice, I would really advise against walking the line closely there, that if you want to honor someone, just wait until they are not running for office, because this is kind of tricky. This is not something I don't think you want to go close to the line on. I see a question. Can someone in office candidate come and speak at an event about an issue that will be on the ballot? We're gonna get to ballot measures. Again, I would prefer to be on the safe side and find a candidate, someone else who can speak about the ballot measure. All right. So LT, do we have time to go back to that list of questions? All right. So I'm not quite sure how to do this online, but for bullet number 1, I think this is easy, right? No endorsements. Bullet number 2, inviting a candidate to speak at your fundraiser. I'd probably say if you can find someone else, that would be better. They can attend as guests of any of your members, but you should be very careful that they don't somehow get the stage at some point and talk about their campaign. And you should also be careful that the board chair or someone, someone else in charge of the event takes the stage and promotes their candidacy. If they're already in office, you just introduce them as being in that office. Let's see. And third bullet, I talked about this already. I would be inclined to say wait, and do it at a safer time. Once they're in office, for example, and they're not running, you can do that. Next page. Let's see. I would be very careful about lending your assets, including your facility, to anyone running for office, because you'll have to make the same opportunities available to others running for office. Online newsletter. I think if you are presenting the positions of 2 senatorial candidates in your newsletter and its issue advocacy, the question here would be, is this something you have always done, spoken out about an issue? I think there is a danger if you suddenly decide in an election year, or within 6 months or 3 months of an election, to become vocal about an issue, then I would say wait. It's much better if you can establish a track record of speaking out on whatever issue matters to your organization. Let's see. Next. I would say no, don't distribute campaign material in your lobby. Can you register voters? Yes. Can you host a candidate debate? Yes, but we went through the rules, and making sure it's nonpartisan, and even the questions that are asked are nonpartisan in terms of selection. Okay, 12:33. All right, we're gonna go back to slide. Let's see. I don't remember what page that is, LT. I think it's 14. Here we go. So just a couple things that, might come up. Well, they certainly come up in California. Recall elections. We don't have any direct guidance from the IRS on this, but probably it's political campaigning because it typically requires a vote of the public to remove the official. It's definitely an issue if the vote also involves who should replace the official. Calls for resignation or impeachment. We, again, no direct guidance, but I think where people are falling in terms of advice is that's probably not prohibited political campaigning because no vote of the public is required, right? For resignation, you're asking the official himself or herself to take action. If it's impeachment, it's the legislature that's taking action. And so that would be could be legislative lobbying, but it's probably not prohibited election work. All right, so that finishes up that part. Next set of questions. Can you, as an individual, the artistic director of your organization, endorse the senatorial candidate? 2, you're a senior staff member and you want to host a campaign coffee for your neighbor who's a candidate. 3, funding for the arts is an important issue in the senatorial candidate. Can you, again, as managing director of your organization, write an editorial about the importance of arts to the health of the community? And so let's talk about that. So the question here is our capacity to act as individuals. We do have the First Amendment, we have a right to speak, but what are the guidelines we have to pay attention to? LT, we can go to the next slide. So as I was saying, organizational leaders may make statements about important policy issues or support or oppose legislation, but we can't make them in our organization's publications or functions. And then when we do make statements, we need to be very clear that we are speaking in our personal capacity. So, a lot of organizations will want you to at least identify yourself. So what generally works, I think, is for you to state your title, your affiliation, but say that that's for identification purposes only, or some such statement that it's clear that you're speaking in your individual capacity and not your organization's. And the higher up you are in your organization, the more care you have to take that you are not speaking on behalf of the organization. Okay, I have 4 minutes and I cover this last topic, which is ballot measures, again, because these are likely to come up in California and on our ballots. So next slide. What if a ballot measure proposes the creation of a fund to guarantee arts education for public elementary schools throughout California? Can your organization communicate support for this ballot measure on its website or in its letter to donors? Can you contribute funding to the ballot measure committee? And then 3rd, can your employees volunteer for the ballot measure committee by tabling outside your local grocery store? And then can you do this during your work time? So the question here is whether this is political activity or something else. Let's see. So this is clearly a ballot measure is actually considered legislative. And if you go back to the definition of what political campaigning is, that's prohibited. It involves supporting or opposing a person for public elected office. So that's not what's happening here. Next slide, LT. So a ballot measure is voted on during an election. It shows up for us in the same piece of paper that we, oops, somebody called in, and so now I've lost my slide, but anyway, I think I'm still looking at all of you. So a ballot measure is voted on during an election, but it's not prohibited political campaigning. Rather, it is a communication that supports or opposes a proposed legislation. This is a little bit in the weeds, but just to understand, the public here are considered the legislature because we're the ones who are voting on this proposed law. Let's see, the thing you have to remember is because it is legislative lobbying, you're gonna need to count it against the legislative lobbying that you might have to report for that year on your Form 990. I was suspecting that this would happen. The rest of the slides, and you guys will get copies of them, talk about what legislative lobbying is. And so I think the thing that I always want to leave people with when you get to this is to consider something called the 501H election, even if you're not doing legislative lobbying activity, or you don't think you will be, because it saves you the trouble of having to figure out whether you are what to count. Because if you elect 501H, only monetary expenditures on lobbying activities count. And that's a lot easier to figure out than whether you are doing an insubstantial amount of lobbying under the case law. So my 4 takeaways in terms of electoral activities is: 1, that most advocacy is neither prohibited political campaigning nor limited in amount legislative lobbying. 2, not everything we see that involves a vote is political, because it might be actually legislative action that you are requesting, which is the case for ballot measures, also the case for confirmation of judges. 3, we were only covering the federal income tax rules in this presentation. And so there might be other reporting requirements under federal political reporting rules, state political reporting rules, as well as local reporting rules. And 4, be careful in an election year about inadvertently supporting friends of your organization who are candidates for elected office. All right, 12:41. Done. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Rose. Thank you for that information. That was very, very thorough. Thank you. We have some questions in the chat and we will be sure to get back to them. I want to make sure that Peter has his time to go over his slides. He's going to take about 20 minutes. And Peter Allen is from San Jose Arts Advocates. And I will pass the mic to you. And LT is getting to your slides now.
Great. Thanks very much, Natasha, and thanks, LT, for running the slides. And thank you, Rose, for the lead-in with incredibly valuable information. I'm so sorry you couldn't get to all of your slides, but I do recommend everyone take a look at all of them because I've seen them all already, and it's got a lot of information that will help keep us all out of jail. So please review thoroughly. And thank you so much. And I want to point out really quickly that this is not only just a really informative webinar, it's also a great example of coming together in the shared values of arts, because Rose and I come from slightly different backgrounds. She is at UCLA, I am a graduate of USC. So we're working together here to help expand your minds. So we just wanted to focus my presentation. Rose did a great job of giving background on how your organizations and your nonprofits can participate in quite a broad range of advocacy that has nothing to do with political campaigning, right? Or even legislative lobbying. So I really encourage you to embrace that. If you are here today, it means that you are interested in having your organization take a more active role or continue their activity, or you think that the mission and vision of the organization calls for it. And I'll speak to that a little bit myself from personal experience. But I'd really encourage you to take action as much as possible in advocacy. A little bit about me, as was mentioned earlier, I'm born and raised here in San Jose. And I'm in love with San Jose, as you can tell from my backdrop. I served on the Arts Commission here for 4 years. And for the past 12 years or so, I've been a board member or volunteer managing director when we needed one of Teatro Vision, which is our local Chicanx Latinx theater company. I'm really excited to say we're celebrating our 40th anniversary this year. So hopefully another 40 years to come. And I also, in 2019, was part of a core group of folks here in San Jose who started a group called San Jose Arts Advocates. And we are attempting to be and trying to grow a local advocacy network here in San Jose and Santa Clara County, which is at the southern end of the Bay Area, if folks are not familiar with where we're at. The capital of Silicon Valley, we like to call ourselves, although I think it's kind of a misnomer. We came together because we recognized that while there was certainly a number of organizations and entities out there that funded the arts and supported the arts in a variety of ways, there really wasn't an organization locally, at least, that like California for the Arts, that advocated for arts and culture and provided an opportunity for not just organizations, but individual artists and the creative community to come together around arts advocacy. So about 5 years ago, we founded the organization. We had some very early wins, and we've done, I think, a great job of building an advocacy network here in San Jose that has protected arts funding. We're hearing about these massive cuts at the state level. We're hearing about cuts in LA and LA County. I'm hearing about every day. Here in San Jose, while we're certainly facing a budget deficit like anyone else, I can tell you that our arts funding is primarily protected. It looks like all of the grants that have been approved by the Office of Cultural Affairs are going to get fully funded this year. And that's a testament not just to the work of the administration to make the dollars and cents work out, but it's also a testament to our advocacy and the work we do. So we're really proud of that, and we really encourage all of you to get engaged at the local level. We would be happy to provide you with a template for how to organize your own local arts advocacy group. Of course, Arts for LA is a very good example. They are a much bigger organization than us. We are a collective. We are not an organized 501c. So I do want to caveat everything I say from that perspective. This is how you can get in touch with us. San Jose Arts is our handle on almost every social media platform. I encourage you to check out our Insta. It's pretty active, probably the most active space we have. We also have a mailing list of more than 400 and growing. And if you're interested in the San Jose or Santa Clara County area, encourage you to take a look at that. We also post a broad range of grant opportunities for artists that don't necessarily or aren't necessarily specific to San Jose. So please feel free to sign up for our mailing list as well. Okay, we can go on to the next slide and we can get into sort of the meat of what I wanted to talk about. Thank you, LT. And that's how individuals and how you can independently become advocates both on your own, but also within and for and on behalf of your organizations, and how you can build coalitions around this work. So more of a practical approach to how this looks on the ground level. So I want to start, again, Rose did a great job of explaining how your organizations can get involved. As far as individual artists, and we should all consider ourselves artists, regardless of whether or not you're, you actually are a practicing artist or you're a leader of an arts organization. We're all in the creative industry. And a bit about me really quickly, I did study screenwriting at USC, so I have an arts background myself. I am not a famous screenwriter. I've segued into doing some of the work I do here, but some of the desires and goals I had as an art student and as a film student have carried on into the work I do now. And primarily that's around social justice and using the arts as an opportunity to move communities and to move communities forward and to give voice to communities that don't necessarily have one and have lacked agency in the past. That's something I always wanted to do with my art. I was really grateful to find a group like Teatro Visión that makes that their focus. That is really part of our mission and vision and values is fighting for social justice, because primarily Chicanx Theater came out of the civil rights movement, out of the farm worker movement. And so it's always been ingrained, that philosophy in our values since our beginning. So artists, I think in a very broad sense, and individuals should think of themselves as the original activists, right? We're the ones who need to step up and use our creative spirit to move not just policy, but move communities. We don't have a lot of money. I'll get into that in a second. We don't have, all those big resources. We're not venture capitalists. We have is people power, and we need to use it, and it's almost our obligation to use it. One thing I think it's really important to ground all of your, if you're independent and your individual advocacy. One is make sure and remember to make it very clear that you're doing it on behalf of yourself, right? If your organization hasn't taken a stand on an issue, you don't want to pull them into an issue, right? So whether if you're an executive, a staff member, a board member, or you have an affiliation with an organization, make sure that it's very clear when you're getting involved anywhere that how your title is being used, what title is being used for you, because the context is very, very important. You'll find that there are a lot of different ways you can define yourself beyond just your organization. And anyone who knows you and knows your organization will know and make that association. So the effect will be the same. So don't worry about a loss of impact if you can't use the title from your organization. But again, make sure that you're speaking from your own heart, your own self, telling your own origin story. The story itself is kind of like, yeah, it's like imagining you're an Avenger and you're a superhero and you want to tell the story of where, you know, why you came, why you're here, why you're in this Zoom right now, why you want to be an advocate, what prompted you to get involved. It's the most powerful tool you have. It's the most powerful tool we have as individuals. Organizations can sign on to big letters like we're doing right now around the state budget, but the power of individual, personal, lived experience is so impactful. I come from a background as well in political campaigning myself. So I've actually worked on and managed campaigns for state, local office, city council, county supervisor. So I know this from sort of both sides of the spectrum. But it's just so impactful to be able to tell a personal story to move people, whether they're voting or you're trying to influence legislation. And something that Rose brought up that I wanted to emphasize, the difference between direct lobbying and grassroots lobbying. So what San Jose Arts Advocates engages in for the most part, and groups like Teatro where I'm a part of, is grassroots lobbying. We do meet ourselves personally as volunteers with city council members and talk in general about arts and cultural policy and funding. But for the most part, when we're talking about anything specific, it's in a very broad sense. We are reaching out to our community and telling them, here, this is what's going on. This is what we think about it. We think you should let the powers that be know what you think about it. If you agree with us, here are some resources that you can use to let them know that, right? And things you can personalize to let them know that. That's really us engaging with our community and leveraging our community to lobby in a very public sense, right? We're putting it all out there. We're putting it all. We're not making any specific asks of any specific council members. We're just putting all of our information out, all of our cards on the table, and hoping that and encouraging our leaders to follow along, but also encouraging our network to encourage them to follow along as well. Direct lobbying, it is something we've thought about getting involved in, and we do try to toe a line with, but it's really like something's on the agenda and we're coming in telling you to vote yes in a private meeting. It's not something we're publicizing, right? That's more direct lobbying. So I would say in general, I'm going to speak more to grassroots lobbying in this presentation, but always, I do agree with Rose. I think it's probably best to err on the side of caution as an organization and register and get that 501H registration, because one, yeah, the accounting is much easier, and two, it just it sets you up a little better for success, right? You're going to find that you're not going to do as much as you think you are, especially when we're talking about monetary investment. So so don't be afraid of getting that registration, because it's very rare any of us are going to go over our allotment, but it is important to track it. Okay, next slide, please. I'm trying to speed myself up here a little bit here. I do talk fast. One thing you can do as an individual when it comes to your organization, right? We've spoken a little bit about, as like the managing director of your organization, could you host a coffee for a candidate? Sure, you as Peter Allen could host a coffee for the candidate, but you as Peter Allen, managing director of Teatro Vision, probably not the best idea to do that, right? However, there are, if you are, issuing an endorsement or supporting a candidate, you have to make abundantly clear as an individual. You still have to make abundantly clear with the candidate and with your organization, how you're being listed, why you're being listed, right, and the context you're being listed in. A lot of candidates will include a broad caveat on their endorsements page, titles listed for identification purposes only. That's generally sufficient to cover you if you're listed with your organization's title. However, I still would strongly recommend finding another way to list yourself just to be safe. And also always if you're going to endorse a candidate as an individual, always let your board know, always let your staff, your key staff know. I just think it's best to err on the side of transparency and getting their feedback. And if you sense any resistance, you may want to rethink doing it, honestly. But when it comes to ballot measures, that's a whole separate kettle of fish. So advocating in, what do I mean by that? You have the opportunity as a board member, as a leader in your organization, or even as a member patron of your organization or a donor, to try to influence that organization to take a stand on an issue, about measure, any sort of action. You can certainly lobby internally to get them to take a stand, to get the board to get involved and get engaged. So it's not just you out there, right? Like, you can get your organization involved. That's certainly an opportunity anyone has, right? So any one voice can move a room. Any one board member could move the board. Don't be afraid to raise these issues internally. They're not going to cause any harm by raising them. At the end of the day, a lot of times these things do fit with the mission and values of your organization. They certainly fit with mine. I can give you a really specific example of how Teatro Vachon handles this. We have an executive committee of our officers. And if we should get a request for support of an initiative or of an action, for example, the recent action from California for the Arts to send an organization or sign on to a coalition letter around the budget, it's something where our executive committee is empowered to make a decision on behalf of the organization of whether or not that fits our mission and values, and we want to do it. And we go ahead and do it, and then we report to the board at our next meeting about what we did. That allows us to be really expedient, but also to have our board weigh in on each individual issue without getting too much into the weeds. So just a real simple example of how we handle it in our organization. And again, our organization at Teatro is social justice oriented. So it's actually within our key values. It may not be in your organization's wheelhouse. So you may want to think about this and put some real thought into how you do your advocacy internally. Okay, next slide, please. My man, LT. Oh, there you go. Becoming Legion. So the power of, what's the old saying, right? If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go further, go together, right? Same applies here in advocacy, right? You don't just have to be, it doesn't have to be you out there. It can be you and your organization. It doesn't have to be your organization. It could be building coalitions across a broad range of sectors, right? One thing I try to remind folks is that while we can bring a lot of people to the table, we can be very passionate, but the arts, are not typically the sexiest issue, right? Or the most controversial issue, right? It's something that everyone likes to support and likes to say nice things about. But when it comes down to it, when you're facing a zeitgeist that has to do with like housing and affordability and homelessness. Right now in San Jose, we have anywhere from 4,000 to 6,000 people living on our streets. A lot of them are artists, but that's the reality right now. And so we have 200, 300 people showing up at budget meetings, town halls, to talk about that, right? So our 5, 10, even 15 arts advocates, which is 10, 15 times more than we've had 5 years ago before SJAA, even if we show up and our dozens of folks who typically do send our form letters to the city council, right? Even with all of that resonance, we still get drowned out in the conversation around broader issues that are just happen to be higher priority. So what I would recommend is, rather than lamenting that and saying, well, shoot, we just got to keep plugging away, I would say start reaching out to the housing advocates, reach out to the advocates on those issues and the other groups that are participating in those issues, other individuals, start to build coalitions and get the arts a seat at those tables within those groups so that our issues can get incorporated into some of the things that they're talking about. Because issues like affordable housing, issues like community safety and empowerment, and responsible budgeting, people-based budgeting, an end to over policing, right, and criminal justice reform. These things all benefit artists, right? Artists all have a way to benefit from that. So don't be afraid to reach out and to build coalitions. And you would be surprised, once we start showing up for them, they will start showing up for us, and suddenly we do have hundreds of people showing up for arts issues. Next, please. People power. So really quickly, that I've emphasized this already, but elected officials, the people in power in any space, they respond to two things: money and people. When it comes to elected officials and policymakers and people who make legislation, they respond to votes. And when it comes to, we're talking about people equate to votes for them, right? Keeping them in office, keeping their livelihood and their level of comfort alive, right? If we don't have a lot of money, and we don't, we've already talked about, we need to bring our people power. We need to bring the vote, right? So we can make an impact without a PAC. just by organizing, voter registration drives, by organizing get out the vote drives. Again, you have to be, we have to be broad-based and open to everyone. But just simply by holding these events as who we are in our communities, right? We're naturally going to attract folks into the fold and into civic engagement who reflect our values. It's just natural, right? You can be as general as you have to be with the message, but that's just that's the folks that are going to come and turn out and show up, right? So get out there, get engaged, build your people power. Teatro Vision is participating this fall in a broad-based intersectional or cross-sectional voter education, voter registration effort around the Latino community, the Latinx community here in San Jose. We're working with the health community and community health clinics. We're working with, yes, arts organizations, but also neighborhood associations and local foundations. So there's great opportunity out there to build our people power. And if we can show that we have that power, if we can show that we have that strength, we'll get a lot more done as well. I think we'll get a lot more movement from our folks. So we've got to get organized. That is not a typo. That's a deliberate typo. We've got to get organized. Anyone seen Taxi Driver? Yeah. Okay. It's a I'm a film nut, so that's a little film reference for you. Okay, that's the only one I'm doing. I've got a couple minutes left, so let's go on to the next slide. It's my favorite one. Paperwork sucks. Okay. But please, when in doubt, document everything. I know it sucks. I know, documenting stuff is a pain in the butt. So if you're a leader in your arts organization, make sure that you are documenting everything that the group is doing, the organization is doing. Make sure, just be safe and document stuff that you're doing too, right? Not even necessarily monetarily. Just make sure you know when you're having meetings, who you're having meetings with. Take some, if you want to be really safe, take what my wife with the JD calls contemporaneous notes. So right after you meet with someone, so you remember what happened there and you can recollect, and it doesn't come up and doesn't become a question as to what you talked about or what was discussed, right? There is an elegant beauty to being a collective like SJAA. We can kind of float between the raindrops a little bit. We try to operate like a 501c4, right? But we are not currently organized. But we try to follow those rules anyway, simply because the perception of conflict of interest, the perception of a violation is sometimes easier to promote than an actual legal conflict or an illegal problem or breaking the law, right? Sometimes easier to, and it's a lot of times it's easier to accomplish to get people to think that there's a conflict when there really might not be. So it's always best from our perspective to err on the side of caution. So we do that, but we also engage in candidate questionnaires. We engage in candidate forums, and like Rose said, we're very general with our questions. We don't ask for pledges. We ask for what they think about our policy priorities and what we're thinking about. But we don't hold them to it necessarily. I'm going to throw a link actually in the chat because I think you might enjoy this. You can take a look at it in your own leisure. But this is the results of a candidate questionnaire that we sent out recently for the city council primary elections here in San Jose. And we graphed the responses of all the candidates who responded, and then told folks who didn't respond on our key issues. So have a look at that in your own time. And then real quick on the Levine Act. Rose, I don't know if we're going to get into it if you have anything on the Levine Act, but this is a new policy that applies to nonprofits that do contract work with like a county or a city entity or a state entity here in California. You actually have to be very careful if you do that contract work that you are documenting any donations that you or other agents of your organization are making to political candidates or candidates for office, because it can come up later if your organization is up for a contract with the county, say, and you, as in your independent capacity or in your individual capacity, made a donation to a county supervisor candidate, right? That would come into play. So I advise you to look this up. I don't have all the information on it. There are great FAQs out there about it. It's a relatively new policy that applies to all of us. So please take a look at it especially if you're going to be doing a lot of lobbying and advocacy work. It's very important to keep in mind. Okay, next slide. Almost done. Sorry, a little bit. Right, so these are some places you can learn things. When this goes out, I'll make sure that you can get the links to all of these, but some good resources for you as an organization. The National Council of Nonprofits has some great information on how you can get engaged. A lot of it was covered by Rose's presentation already. The Silicon Valley Council of Nonprofits, if you're here in the Bay Area, has also great resources. I actually leaned on their CEO to get some information from her latest presentation on this topic. So they're a great resource. And Nonprofit Vote, another fantastic resource for learning more. So I've got some information on advocacy versus lobbying. And then, of course, you can reach out to San Jose Arts Advocates anytime to learn more about local rules, because as Rose mentioned, you should definitely study up on especially city regulations. I found the city of San Jose has some very specific regulations around lobbying that you do need to pay attention to as far as reporting goes, and also election and campaign finance regulations. But the FEC, the federal IRS regulations tend to apply broadly, but there are some specific state and local mostly reporting requirements that you need to be aware of if you're going to, and mostly applies to if you're going to be doing lobbying or spending money on ballot measure campaigns, right? There are different levels of reporting for those kind of expenditures that you need to be aware of. And real quick, I did want to answer, there was a question in the chat from Ariel. Could you speak to the distinction between a town hall and a campaigning event? It's really just semantics, right? A town hall could be a campaign event. It could also be a candidate or an event for an elected official, like an official city or county or state function, right? It really depends on the context of the event and the capacity that the candidate slash elected official slash, the host is playing, right? If it's candidate X for mayor, right, hosting a town hall on public safety, that's a campaign event, right? Especially if it says at the bottom of the flyer that they're using to invite you paid for by campaign, that's a campaign event. If it's Mayor Joe Blow or Jane Blow hosting a town hall on public safety, right, and it's officially paid for by the office of the mayor and the city, that's a city event, and that's not a campaign event. Now, the line blurs when candidate X is also the mayor, right? Candidate X is running for Congress or something else, right? But they're also the mayor at the same time. So then it's really important to know the context and the capacity. But like Rose said, I've said before, err on the side of caution. If you're towing the line, try to find another alternative. Try to find someone else who can host the event, speak to the issue, anyone who's not currently a candidate. And I run into this even with political organizations that try to stay neutral, right? We're more general based. We don't do our own endorsements. So I have to navigate this quite a bit. So it's always best to just to err on the side of caution. Great, I was able to answer that. And that's, I think, all I have. I forget if I have another slide here, but I think I'm done. Oh yeah, go forth. Thank you for listening. And I'll drop a couple of links in the chat, which will also be included in the follow-up information. So you can learn more about SJAA and also Teatro de Shown if you are interested. And thanks very much for letting me go a little over.
Absolutely. Thank you, Peter, for sharing everything that you shared. Great information. Thank you for answering the question in the chat. And now we can go to the next slide. I added a little Q&A slide there. Actually, no, we didn't. Sorry about that. We're going to do a little Q&A for a minute. We can actually leave that slide up if you'd like. And if there's any questions, I just ask that you use the reactions tab to raise your hand if you'd like. And I did see one question in the chat that was not answered. I think it was answered throughout Rose's presentation, but I do just want to acknowledge it. Carol Lakes from Ojai Storytelling Festival asked, a candidate for mayor wants to hold a fundraising event with our organization as the fundraising recipient. Is that allowed? And I think Rose answered that, but Rose, if you want to touch on that, then feel free to hop in.
Kara, hopefully, like I said, I think I covered that. I would definitely say no in that situation. Yeah, as Peter said, if they're already mayor and they're in their capacity as mayor to talk about a local issue, that's one thing. But it sounds like the fact pattern you're presenting is they want to hold a fundraising event. So that answer would be one of the few clear no's in this discussion. So is that good, Kara?
Yes, thank you.
Great, thanks.
If I could really quickly, there's also some, if it's a fundraiser, like if the candidate and or elected official, or I'm sorry, if it's an elected official, I wouldn't do it if it was a candidate, but for an elected official who wants to host a fundraiser that benefits you or your organization, they also have to be very aware that they often have reporting requirements for contributions made in behest of. So even folks that they're requesting you donate to, not them necessarily. They still have to report that, the elected official does. You don't necessarily have to, but they do. So important for them to know that. They should know that already as well. And it gets a little dicey when it comes to an elected official or candidate raising money for you, right? The elected can sponsor your event through their office. They can do a lot of things. They don't have to host an event for you. They could be a lot clearer and cleaner.
There's a whole other regime we have to think about, even with grants, if they, like I mentioned earlier, ballot measures are considered legislative lobbying, not political or election work. But depending where you live, and the way the political reporting rules work in California, they might have to be reported by you as grantee, that they contributed to your ballot measure campaign. So it's not that it's prohibited, but it might have to be reportable. So, but that again, that's like a whole other, and there are lawyers who specialize specifically in the political law aspects of all of this. So that would be the one caveat with the ballot measure work.
Excellent. I think, Rose, did you answer this question? Can someone in office or candidate come and speak at an event about an issue that will be on the ballot?
I think I did in the middle of it, and I think that's where I said I would rather, if I were advising you, I would rather you choose someone else to talk about an issue. If they're already running as a candidate, that it would be better to have someone else speak about the issue that will be on the ballot. Because you just want to avoid the appearance of you're highlighting them. That makes sense.
We have another question in the chat from Bob Lehman. What are the basic rules involved with an organization sharing through e-blasts or social media to write to your representative to support funding, like what's being shared by California for the Arts now to write the governor about cuts to CAC funding?
Right. So in that case, I guess basic rules. So right here, so I guess it depends how it's written, Bob. I mean, it can be more policy kind of statement, like generally you're supporting funding for the arts. And so that would, I think, fall into just, especially if that's something your organization's been doing. Now, if as an individual and not as, I think you were in San Diego Museum, you can always do that. You can do it, I guess, either way, if it's a policy statement. If you're actually writing that and asking them to support specific legislation that's been proposed to support funding for the arts, then that would count as lobbying activity by your organization. But that's fine too. So basically, whether you share it as an e-blast on social media or in the newspaper, it will count. If you are elected, have elected 501H as an organization, then it probably has a lot less impact on the amount of legislative lobbying you're done for that year, because that tends to cost a lot less than TV, radio, or even a newspaper ad. So, you don't really have to treat doing things on social media any differently in terms of the substance of how it will be treated by the IRS. The tricky thing is, as I was mentioning earlier, is if you are just sharing or linking to others who are also writing in that vein, then their speech will be counted as your speech. That's the main difference with working online. It's a lot easier to take someone else's speech and then have it attributed to you. Bob, does that help?
I can piggyback on that a little bit, and just in terms of, like, for example, the campaign that's actually on your screen right now, right? The Write Your Representatives campaign. Speaking, I think a distinction Rose made earlier as well, right? This is something that's this is a budget decision that's made by the legislature and the governor. It's not something that's on the ballot. It's not something that the voters are deciding, right? So right then and there, first off, it's not an electoral issue, so you're not going to be in any danger of getting involved in any sort of electoral malfeasance. And then when it comes to, the work that California Arts Advocates, which is a C4, right, does lobbying. They do direct lobbying, right? They can go in and do track, and it's really what they're there for, to go in and do the direct lobbying with legislators to advocate for them to do specific things. And then the grassroots lobbying, which I reference, is what they're doing here, right? Asking all of us in their network, in their community, to, as individuals, decide on our own to adopt their talking points if we choose, or just to write letters to legislators and the governor, right? They provide a template, but it's really just them providing the tools and the opportunity and the encouragement. But we're the ones, individuals, volunteers in the community, who are doing the lobbying. And since we're individual volunteers in the community, it's perfectly permissible, right? So it is lobbying that is pretty much allowed, by both by the entity and by the individual. It comes down to when it's something, there's a vote of the people, right? There's something on the ballot, or there's definitely not a candidate, right? You wouldn't want your organization to ask their members to vote for a certain candidate, right? That's completely verboten, right? So there are some distinctions, and with regard to what's going on right now, this is more legislative lobbying and grassroots lobbying that California.
Peter, I want to add a little bit to what
Please.
I said earlier. The other nice thing about 501H, in addition to that you only have to pay attention to dollars expended, is that the rules about what actually counts as legislative lobbying are so much clearer. You know, so it again, that's the part I didn't really get to. It really deserves its own webinar. But with 501H, there's a very specific definition of when you're legislative lobbying, as opposed to under the case law, you know, it's like promoting propaganda or something like that. So so you might be able to, or you can, if you really know the rules, avoid falling into the specific definitions of legislative lobbying, as opposed to kind of whether that feels like policy communication or actual lobbying communication. So another reason to really look at that as an option.
Excellent. Are there any other questions? If there's anyone else that has a question, please feel free to hop in or write it in the chat. We'll just give it a few more minutes. And if not, we can move forward with some announcements. I'm not seeing any. All right. Well, I want to thank Rose and Peter. Thank you for taking the time to explain to us electoral activities and nonprofits' involvement in electoral activities. Before we finish up, we have some quick announcements, but we want to invite Tracy, who is our Director of Field Engagement, in to speak more about what we've been talking about with the letters, with our the state budget, and some of the advocacy work that California Arts Advocates and California for the Arts is doing right now.
Hi, everyone. I'm so glad to be with you. And thank you so much, Rose and Peter, for sharing your wisdom and getting us all up to speed on these areas of activities, of advocacy activities. I'm zooming in from Ventura County, the sacred and ancestral lands of the Chumash, and Tracy Hudak, Director of Field Engagement. I want to give a quick update for anybody on the call that's in the creative, cultural traditions or arts community, performing arts, etc. Did you guys already give a little bit of the landscape of what's happening with the budget cuts before I jumped on, Peter?
No, we haven't gone over that.
Okay, just a real quick thing. The state has a severe budget deficit, and the governor and the legislature has to make some really hard choices on where these cuts happen. And one of the general proposals was that everybody, all the agencies, are going to feel a bit of a hit. Our California Arts Council, and that was going to be around 8% spread across everybody. The funding to the California Arts Council is being cut by 38%. It has an annual dollar amount to distribute to local communities. That's $26 million. That is being cut to $16 million. And the California Arts Council was already functioning at cut level. That $26 million is lower than the highest it was ever funded, which was in the year 2000. So we're almost 25 years ago, and and that was at 30 million then, which would be in 57 million in today's dollars. So we're severely already undercut. That's the conversation we're having with legislators on the grassroots and grass tops level. And additionally, SB 116, a really, really important innovation, policy and programmatic innovation for our live and performing arts organizations, that piece of legislation, the funding for that legislation, which was to reimburse payroll expenses and help sustain performing arts organizations and live arts worker jobs, that funding has been pulled back. That's $12.5 million has been pulled back into the budget, which was to launch a program that was 5 years in the making, and to address a number of issues that have been deeply impacting the performing arts. So as a total, the arts, in terms of local funding that's going to your communities for the arts, our hit has been 58% of all funding. It's way too big of a hit. And so what's happening, there's kind of a multi-tiered campaign going on. One is the grassroots letter. We're sharing information about that in the chat. You jump on our website and put in your address. It'll send customized messages to your representatives, the governor and your state representatives, some of which are serving on arts committees. And so they get a special message like, so the grassroots letter, you can participate in it as an individual, sign on as an organization, and please share with your network. Additionally, we have a coalition letter for anybody who's an organization. I don't know if we are sharing that in the chat. I'm trying to speak quickly to be respectful of all your time together. But that is, we're asking organizations to sign on to a letter that is going to budget committee and legislature leadership. So the Speaker of the Assembly, Senate Pro Tem, and then all the members of our key budget committee members, letting them know that organizations, businesses, collectives across the state want them to oppose these cuts, restore the funding, and not have the arts take a disproportionate blow. We're kind of the belief that 2020, the state declared that artists are the state's second responders, that were essential to the economy, well-being, vibrancy of our state, and we are no longer willing to take being the first cut and to be treated as an amenity. So anyway, that's what these campaigns are about. And if this is something that aligns with your principles in terms of state funding support, the campaigns are directly at those. If this is something, we would love for you to participate, and I'm happy to answer any questions as well. If additionally, what'll be coming next is a phone calls to budget committee members, letting them know this is kind of the grass top strategy, hitting committee leadership, but the grassroots is really, really important too, reaching out to your individual representatives, et cetera. So we have all the tools, resources, happy to answer any questions. Please put my email in the chat to support you amplifying your voice around these issues. And Rose and Peter, does that align with what folks can do?
Yeah, I was just typing in the chat that just to make sure I'm not scared anyone, but all of this work that you're describing is on the legislative lobbying side of things, not the election political campaigning work. And so C3s are absolutely allowed to do this. And I would just say, and it's unlikely from what you're asking of us to affect, to get to where it's beyond the unsubstantial amount or whatever. And so just keep track of what you're spending. As Peter said, I think it's a really good rules. Keep track of what you're spending, keep track of like just how much time people are spending on it, but it's not, it's allowed. So because I spent so much time on what's not allowed. I just want to make sure people know this is not that work. So
oh, that's great. We've got the theory and the practice.
Well, it's just two sides, right? There's an
Yeah.
election political, but no, we're not talking here about supporting or opposing any candidates for elected office. That's the prohibited part. This is all legislative lobbying work. So,
Great.
yeah.
And this slide refers to the graphics that are available in the toolkit that's linked in terms of sharing with your network, and hashtags to use to amplify and connect us on social media. We're finding LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter has been hard lately, but I'm still seeing stuff on Twitter. So wherever you connect with your network, we would really appreciate your sharing these actions. And next slide, please. Yeah, and you can reach out to Eduardo. Oh, we'll play the video. Sorry, from Julia, our CEO. She's the CEO of California Arts Advocates, our lobbying organization, and Californians for the Arts, our 501c3.
Tracy, I will just add that if I'm assuming most people have an elected 501h, but you can. That if you don't elect 501h, you have to describe your lobbying activities on your Form 990. So just keep track of what it is you're doing. And this is like a sentence or two, right? So it's supporting, efforts on this on the arts funding side. So that'd be the only thing. But
Great.
you're absolutely allowed to do it. So
Thank you, Rose. Do you want to go ahead with the video? Just a minute.
I'm sorry.
No, perfect.
Back at the Capitol, and we are here to protect and restore the funding cuts that the governor proposed in his May revise. But we need you. We need you to send in those letters to your legislators opposing the cuts. We need thousands upon thousands of letters. We're not the only industry that's getting cut, but we are the industry that's getting disproportionately cut based on our budget and overall funding for arts and culture. So let's do this. And while you're at it, I hope that you will also join us as members. I know that seems sort of strange to say, hey, you might be getting a funding cut from overall public funding and we need you to join us, but I'll tell you this. This is a full-time plus job for our team to ensure that this doesn't happen. We're doing everything we can. And you want to make sure that you have a lobbying organization at the Capitol doing this for arts and culture. So support California Arts Advocates as a lobbying organization, or support California for the Arts as our nonprofit. But really, truly, this is the time to take action. We cannot be silent. We do not want to end up as 45th in the United States for public funding for the arts. So we're counting on you. Thank you. Grow with us and join us.
Great. So Julie's at the Capitol now. We're giving testimony and hearings, taking meetings with legislators, getting them. We have we have what's called a Dear Colleague letter. The chair of the Senate Arts Committee, Ben Allen, and Assembly Member Gibson, who is the chair of the Assembly Arts and Entertainment Committee, though they are produced a letter that they're going to have their legislative partners, colleagues sign on to oppose the cuts. So on the lobbying side, we're taking meetings, getting folks to agree to sign on to those letters, giving them the background, all that kind of stuff. So when Julie says this is this is right, we're going 24/7 right now over these next couple of weeks because it's coming fast. So if you have the capacity and it feels meaningful to you to support advocacy financially, sometimes folks decide to do that because they can't, it's like somebody do the labor for me, let's make it happen kind of a thing. We would love your support and engagement. And I'm happy to also answer any questions about these issues. If anybody has anything, please drop it in the chat. Senator Portantino, I'm so sorry. Yes, you're absolutely right. Thank you, Terry. Senator Portantino, who's led the charge for the Equitable Payroll Fund. That's SB 116. So he's been an incredible champion, and he's the lead of that Dear Colleague letter. Thank you. I blanked. Okay.
Tracy, do you want to share more about the membership campaign a bit?
Sure. I think we've kind of said enough
Okay.
about that. We
We're
do
good.
a big push in May to help get us through the budget negotiations that happen with the May revision of the governor's budget all the way through June. So that we would love your support. This year we have these cool swag packages. We've got these groovy t-shirts and mugs and things that we're going to raffle off, a couple of them every week. And yeah, and we have two different forms if you would like to help fund the lobbying, which is harder for us to fund than a traditional nonprofit because those deductions aren't tax deductible. We would appreciate your support of California Arts Advocates, and or support our advocacy network, which provides free programs, trainings, actions, and network building and support for advocacy on the local, state, and federal level. So thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Tracy, for sharing everything that you just shared. And for our last slide, we just got one more last announcement, and then we're going to let you all go. The last slide is to announce that we have our Wonky Wednesdays. This is digging deep into California politics, and we're going to be looking over policy. We'll have a different topic every month for you all to learn a bit more about the advocacy work that, not only the advocacy work that we're doing, but looking at advocacy work across the state and politics across the state and how we can make our state shape it to, you know, the way that we really would like to see as an arts community with our arts ecosystem. Thank you again for joining us. Oh yeah, in the chat, you can sign up for Wonky Wednesdays. That's the link there. And the dates are also there, as you also see on the screen here. June 12th, July 10th, and August 14th, we'll have a series of conversations around policy. Thank you all for joining us again. Thank you to the entire CA for the Arts and CA Arts Advocates team and board members. I saw some board members in the chat. Thank you for joining us today. And again, thank you to Rose and Peter for taking the time out to really break down nonprofits engagement in electoral activities. And I hope you all enjoy your day, and we look forward to seeing you all in the future. Also, you have my email address. I think I emailed each person individually. You have Tracy's, Eddie's. If you need to get in touch with anybody on the team, please reach out. We are accessible, and the recording and the slides will be available to you within the next week. We have a lot going on right now with the advocacy work that we're doing, but we will get the slides to you. And always thank you to our CEO, Julie, for being on the ground doing the work. And if you can join us, I think it was in the chat, but on the 29th, May 29th, we'll be in Sacramento for a rally. So please join us if you're there. And thank you. I hope you all have an amazing day. Cheers.